Rain drifted through the morning light like a veil of silver threads. The memorial garden was quiet except for the murmur of umbrellas and the slow crack of thunder over the harbor. Ethan Vale stood alone before the marble stone bearing his wife's name. His breath clouded in the cold. 1 year, 12 months since the sea had swallowed her and left him with silence. Behind him, assistants whispered and reporters waited at a distance, hungry for the image of the billionaire still grieving. Ethan barely heard them. His whirl. Then a small voice cut through the noise. "Your wife is still alive." Ethan turned. A girl stood just beyond the circle of mourners. She was drenched, her hoodie clinging to her thin frame, her eyes too calm for someone her age. She could not have been more than 11. For a moment he thought he misheard. "What did you say?" The girl did not blink. "I saw her. Your wife. She's not dead." A laugh slipped from one of his bodyguards. Ethan raised a hand, and the man fell silent. He looked back at the girl. She spoke again, steady and sure. "I was there the night the boat sank. I saw her come out of the water. They took her." Ethan felt the words dig into the numb place he had built inside himself. He wanted to turn away to send her off into the rain. Instead, he asked, "Who took her?" The girl hesitated, as if the memory hurt. Men in black coats. One of them had a fake arm. They dragged her into a van. She was bleeding. She kept saying your name. The crowd behind him had gone still. Ethan tried to breathe. His wife Lena had drowned off the coast of Maine during a storm. The Coast Guard had searched for weeks. No trace. He whispered, "That's impossible." The girl lifted her left arm and traced a line from her elbow to her wrist. She had a scar right here, short blonde hair, a gold necklace with 2 letters L and E. Ethan's pulse quickened. No one outside the family knew about the scar. Lena had gotten it in college, falling through a greenhouse window during a protest. And the necklace had been a gift he made for their 10th anniversary. He felt the earth tilt beneath him. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "Amara." She hugged her arms and looked down. "I tried telling the police. They said I made it up." Ethan stared at her. Somewhere inside the disbelief was something worse. Hope. It clawed at the grief that had become his only truth. He stepped forward. "Show me what you saw." The girl nodded. But as they turned toward the gates, a man in a grey raincoat lowered a pair of binoculars at the far end of the cemetery and spoke into a hidden earpiece. "They've made contact. Proceed to step 2. The car ride was silent. Ethan sat in the back seat beside the girl, the city sliding by in streaks of grey. She kept her eyes on the window. He studied her reflection in the glass. Small face, thin hands, an old scar above the eyebrow. She looked like someone who had learned not to expect kindness. Finally, he asked, "Where did you see the van?" "Down by the docks near Pier 14. "Behind the old cannery." "I hide there sometimes when it rains." Ethan pressed his palms together. "You live on the streets." She nodded once. He turned to his driver. "Head to the estate." The Vale estate rose from the cliffs like a monument to order. Glass and steel overlooking the same ocean that had taken his wife. Inside, warmth and silence wrapped the hallways. Ethan led the girl through rooms that smelled of polished wood and sea salt. She looked around wide-eyed but said nothing. In the den, he handed her a blanket and motioned to the fire. She sat near it trembling, unsure whether to relax or run. A housekeeper entered with a tray of food. Amara hesitated, then began to eat, as if afraid the plate might vanish. Between bites she whispered, "I haven't had real food in a long time." Ethan watched her the way her hands shook when she lifted the cup. "What about school?" "Sometimes. When the shelters make me." He nodded slowly. Then he asked, "Why tell me now? I saw your face in a magazine at the library. It said you were giving a speech at the memorial today. I thought maybe you'd listen." Outside the windows the storm deepened. Lightning flashed across the sea. Ethan stood before the glass and tried to steady his thoughts. Was this manipulation? A cruel prank? Yet every detail she had said about Lena was true. The scar, the necklace, the short hair after chemotherapy. He turned back. "You said one of them had a fake arm." "Which arm?" "The left one. It made a clicking sound when he moved it. White like plastic. Not metal." Ethan froze. Years ago his company had developed a prototype prosthetic for the military. The contract was cancelled after an ethics investigation. Only a few units had ever been produced. He felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He called Reed Monroe just past midnight. The man's voice came through the speaker, rough and tired. "You told me you were done with this, Ethan." "I was. Until tonight. I need surveillance on Pier 14 and the cannery. Look for unregistered vehicles or anyone with an artificial limb." Reed grunted. "I'll see what I can do." When he hung up, Ethan turned to the girl curled asleep on the couch. She looked smaller without the hoodie, her face soft in the firelight. He draped a blanket over her and stood watching the flames. For the first time in a year, he let himself imagine Lena breathing somewhere beyond the horizon. Morning brought no clarity, only a dull grey light and the sound of waves hitting the rocks below. Amara woke to the smell of coffee and toast. Ethan was already dressed, phone in hand, scanning emails that felt suddenly irrelevant. "You slept well." She nodded shyly. "The couch is softer than any bed I've had." He smiled faintly. "Good, because today we find out if you were right." An hour later, they drove toward the docks. The city was still wet, the streets reflecting the sky like broken glass. Amara pointed from the back seat. "There, behind that fence." The cannery loomed over the harbor, a skeleton of rusted metal and shattered windows. A faded sign read, "New England Seafood Company." Reed Monroe was already waiting, leaning against an unmarked SUV. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his eyes scanning the area even as he greeted Ethan. "You really think your wife's down there? I think this girl saw something no one else did." Reed studied Amara. She met his gaze without flinching. He nodded once. "Let's see what ghosts are left." Inside, the air smelled of salt and decay. They moved through dark corridors lit only by their flashlights. The floor was slick, the walls streaked with grime. Near the back, a steel door hung on new hinges. Reed forced it open. The room beyond was small, cleaner than the rest, almost sterile. A rusted cot sat in the center. Restraints dangled from its corners. On the wall, scratched into concrete, were two letters, LV. Ethan touched them with his fingertips. Fresh. Within weeks. She was here. Reed found a syringe on the tray beside the cot. Empty, but recent. He looked at Ethan. Someone used this place for containment, not storage. Ethan stood frozen, the world narrowing to the carved initials. For the first time since the storm, he could feel her presence, as if the air still carried her breath. He whispered her name, Lena. From behind him, Amara's small voice trembled. "I told you." Ethan turned. She looked both proud and frightened. He forced a breath. "You were right." Her eyes glistened. "Does that mean she's alive?" "It means she was. And that's enough for now." Back at the SUV, the rain returned in fine mist. Ethan sat behind the wheel staring at the building as if it might breathe again. Reed leaned on the door. Whoever took her knew how to vanish. But someone funded this. These locks aren't from any junkyard. Ethan nodded slowly. His mind replayed the old contract files, the cancelled defense deals, the list of subcontractors. One name rose above the rest. Whitmore Intelligence Systems. He had met its founder once, Hale Whitmore, a man who smiled too easily, a man who believed the world could be controlled with information. Ethan exhaled through his teeth. "Find me everything on Whitmore." That night, Amara sat by the fireplace, drawing on a pad of paper he had given her. Lines formed quickly beneath her pencil. A woman's face, short hair, eyes wide with fear. "You've drawn her before," Ethan said. "Only in my head," Amara answered. "I try to remember her face so I won't forget." Ethan felt something break quietly inside him. A stranger's child had held on to his wife's image when he himself had tried to bury it. He said softly, "Tomorrow we go back to the water." Amara looked up. "Why?" "To see where it started." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not scared." The next day dawned cold and bright. The sea was calm, deceitful in its stillness. Ethan steered the boat toward the coordinates where Lena's vessel had vanished. Amara stood beside him, wrapped in a thick jacket. She pointed to the horizon. That night the waves were higher. "I saw lights near the bluff." Ethan squinted. "There was an old research platform out there decommissioned years ago. Maybe that's where they took her." Reed's voice crackled through the radio. "Got a hit on Whitmore. He runs a private network now. Logistics security, maybe Black Ops. Operates offshore." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we're close." As they docked, Amara bent to tie her shoelaces, and something small fell from her pocket. A fragment of metal shaped like a tracking tag. Ethan picked it up. "Where did you get this?" "From the ground near the cannery. It fell off the van that night." He turned it over, seeing a faint serial number etched on the side. The same manufacturer that once supplied his company. Proof. He slipped it into his coat. The puzzle was beginning to form. That evening, the three of them gathered around a map in the study. Reed traced a circle along the coast. "There's a cluster of shell companies linked to Whitmore. One of them leases a compound 2 miles inland from that platform. If Lena was moved, it would be there." Amara leaned forward, her small hand resting on the map. "Then let's go get her." Reed smiled faintly. "You've got more courage than most adults I know." Ethan watched her. Maybe courage was the one thing they could not buy or fake. Outside the house, unseen by them, a car idled at the end of the drive. Inside sat a man in a grey coat. He spoke into his phone. "They're moving faster than expected." The reply came through cold and flat. "Then adjust. Make sure the girl doesn't live long enough to remember more. Inside the estate, Ethan closed his laptop and looked once more at the ocean. The tide was rising again, erasing footprints along the sand. Everything in him ached to believe that what he had seen in that small room meant Lena was still somewhere waiting. But belief had teeth. It could save him or destroy him. Behind him, Amara stood at the doorway holding the sketch of Lena. She asked quietly, "Do you think she's scared?" Ethan answered without turning, "She's alive, that's what matters. And as long as she is, we keep going." Night settled heavy over the cliffs. The lights of the city flickered far below. In a room that smelled of salt and ash, a girl who had spent her life unseen finally slept under a real roof. And a man who had lost everything began to feel the faint, dangerous pulse of hope. Somewhere out beyond the waves, a woman opened her eyes in the dark and whispered a name, Ethan. And the sea kept her secret for one more night. The night pressed against the windows of the Vale estate like a living thing. Ethan stood before the fire staring into the flames, as if they might form answers. Amara sat nearby, knees stuck to her chest, sketchbook open but forgotten. The room hummed with the soft pulse of machines and the faint cry of wind outside. Reed Monroe entered, coat damp with salt air, eyes sharp with fatigue. He tossed a folder onto the table. "Found your ghost. Whitmore's offshore accounts lead to a holding facility near Rock Harbor. Private security, no official records." Ethan looked up. "How soon can we move?" Reed poured himself coffee that had gone cold. "We move when we know what we're walking into. You still think your wife is there. I know she was in that room. That means she's somewhere close." Amara spoke softly from the couch. "The man with the fake arm. He said something to the others that night. Black triangle." Reed turned to her. "What did you say?" "Black triangle. They had it painted on their jackets. I thought it was just a shape." Reed frowned. "That name has shown up before. Old intelligence reports. Private network of traffickers, ex-military politicians. No one ever proved it existed." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It exists now. And it has my wife." They drove before dawn, the sea still cloaked in fog. The road wound through pine forests, slick with dew. The headlights carving narrow tunnels of light. Amara watched from the back seat, her small hands clenched around the edge of her blanket. She did not speak. When they reached the overlook above Rock Harbor, the fog began to thin. Below them stretched a compound of low concrete buildings surrounded by fencing and cameras. Reed raised his binoculars. 2 guards at the gate, no insignia. Inside I count at least 6 heat signatures. Ethan's voice was calm. "Then she's there." Reed lowered the binoculars. "Or her body is." They waited until nightfall. The compound slept beneath floodlights that cut the mist into pillars. Reed and Ethan crawled along the ridge, breath steaming in the cold. Amara stayed in the car, headphones on, eyes fixed on the glowing GPS tracker. Her voice came through their earpieces. "Gate patrol moving east. You have 30 seconds." Ethan whispered, "Good work, kid." They slipped through a gap in the fence, crossed the yard, and pressed against the wall of the nearest building. The door was locked, but Reed's small charge cracked it open with a hiss. Inside, the air was metallic and dry. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. They moved in silence until they reached a corridor lined with numbered doors. From behind one came a sound, a low, muffled cough. Ethan pushed forward before Reed could stop him. The door opened on a narrow cell. A woman sat against the wall, wrists bound, eyes closed. Her hair was shorter, streaked with grey, but the curve of her face was unmistakable. Lena. Ethan dropped to his knees. She flinched from the light, then looked up. Her eyes widened. Ethan. He caught her hands. "It's me. I'm here." She trembled in disbelief. "I thought I was dead." Reed moved quickly, checking the hallway. "We need to move now. Alarms will trip any second." Ethan lifted Lena carefully. She could barely stand. They reached the exit just as the first siren wailed. Floodlights burst to life. Gunfire cracked the air. Reed shouted into the comm, "Move the car." Amara started the engine and the headlights flared. Ethan ran with Lena in his arms, the world around him a blur of light and thunder. A figure stepped from the shadows, blocking their path. The left arm gleamed white in the glare. The man smiled with half his mouth. Going somewhere. Gideon Price, the man from Amara's memory. Reed fired, but Gideon was fast. The shot grazed his shoulder. He swung his prosthetic arm with brutal strength, knocking the gun away. Ethan set Lena behind him. Reed lunged again, knife in hand. The fight was short, desperate, messy. The metallic arm struck like a hammer. Reed staggered. Gideon raised the arm for the final blow, and then a sound split the air. A car horn, headlights screaming toward them. Amara at the wheel. The vehicle hit Gideon square in the chest, hurling him into the dirt. The engine smoked. Amara jumped out, shaking eyes wide with terror. "I didn't mean to kill him." Ethan grabbed her shoulders. "You saved us." Gideon coughed blood, laughing weakly. "You think this ends here? Ask Whitmore about the triangle." He smiled one last time and went still. Reed pulled Ethan toward the car. "Move!" They drove into the forest tires, spraying mud. Behind them, the compound burned in the distance, alarms fading into the night. Hours later, they hid in an abandoned motel off the highway. The room smelled of mildew and dust. Lena slept under a thin blanket, her breathing shallow. Amara sat beside the bed watching her. "She looks tired, but she's beautiful," Amara whispered. Ethan nodded. He could not stop staring at her face, at the proof that hope had not been a lie. Reed was at the window, checking his laptop. Satellite images show another site linked to Whitmore. This one, inland near DC. Maybe a control hub. Ethan rubbed his eyes. What's left of that place can wait. We need to get her stable. Reed turned the screen around. "You might want to see this first." The news feed showed the explosion at Rock Harbor. Officials denying knowledge. A statement from Whitmore Intelligence Systems expressing concern and offering assistance. Ethan leaned closer. He's already cleaning it up. By morning, Lena was awake. Her voice was hoarse but firm. "They kept me moving from place to place. Experiments, interviews, drugs. They called me by a number. When I stopped cooperating, they brought others. Women, children, the ones who disappeared from shelters." Amara looked down, her voice barely audible. "That's what they wanted me for too." Lena reached out a trembling hand to her. You're safe now. But her eyes met Ethan's with quiet dread. They won't stop. He knows we're alive. Ethan nodded. Then we don't hide. We bring him into the light. They drove south, through rain and sunlight and cities that did not know what hid beneath their streets. Reed arranged safe houses. Ethan called in favors from old contactsmen who owed him from the days when money could buy silence. Each step drew them closer to Washington and to the truth that waited there. Amara filled a notebook with names and symbols she remembered from the compound. Circles, triangles, strings of numbers. Reed cross-referenced them with military archives. They matched coordinates of abandoned bases once leased by private contractors. The pattern formed a network across the country. Black Triangle was not a myth. It was an invisible government feeding on the forgotten. At a rest stop outside Baltimore, Amara looked up from her notebook. Why did they take her? Ethan hesitated. Because she was getting too close. Lena was writing a story about missing cargo ships. She found links to human trafficking. When she tried to publish, they made it look like an accident. Amara's voice cracked. But you were the one funding them. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. Not knowingly. My company handled logistics for dozens of clients. I didn't see the signs. Reed spoke quietly from the passenger seat. Maybe you didn't want to. The words cut deep, but Ethan said nothing. They reached D.C. at dusk. The city glowed gold against the river monuments, rising like ghosts. Lena's strength was returning, but she moved carefully wrapped in a borrowed coat. Reed led them through a maze of alleys to a safe apartment. He locked the door behind them. Whitmore's influence runs deep. We need evidence strong enough to break through his cover. Ethan placed the metal tag Amara had found on the table. This came from one of his vans. Serial number matches a batch my company sold to his subsidiary. That's the start. Reed nodded. I'll dig. But if we go after him, he'll come after the girl. Ethan looked at Amara. She's already part of this. She deserves the truth. Lena joined them at the table. Her eyes were clear now, filled with quiet fury. We expose him. All of it. No deals. No lawyers. We show the world what he's built. Reed smiled grimly. Then we need to break into his system. His main data servers are off the grid deep underground. Ethan met his gaze. Tell me where. 2 nights later, they moved again. The air in the van was tense, filled with the hum of computers and the static of radio chatter. They wore black faces hidden beneath caps and scarves. Amara stayed behind with a radio, her small voice their guide through the maze of security feeds she had hacked using stolen codes. Left at the next hall. 2 guards ahead. The basement corridor was narrow, lined with cables and cold light. Ethan's pulse drummed steady as a metronome. He found the main door and swiped the stolen card. The lock clicked open. Inside, rows of servers blinked in the dark like sleeping eyes. Reed began copying data while Ethan searched the side rooms. He found medical files, transport logs, financial trails. Hundreds of names. The missing, the sold. Proof enough to shatter Whitmore's empire. Then the lights cut out. Emergency red flooded the hall. Reed's voice crackled. They tripped an alarm. We need 3 more minutes. Ethan heard footsteps approaching. He grabbed the nearest metal bar and waited. The first guard rounded the corner. Ethan swung. The man fell. Two more appeared and Reed fired warning shots. The sound echoed like thunder. Amara's voice burst through the radio. "Security teams coming from the west tunnel. You have 1 minute." Ethan yanked the hard drive from the console. "Let's go." They ran through smoke and chaos, bursts of gunfire chasing their heels. Reed took a bullet to the shoulder but kept moving. They burst into the open air as sirens screamed through the city. A van waited. Amara threw open the door. "Go, go, go." Ethan pulled Reed inside and they sped into the night. When the adrenaline faded, silence filled the van. Reed pressed a hand against his bleeding shoulder. Worth it. Ethan stared at the drive. On it lay proof of everything they had lost and everything they could still save. Amara looked between them. What now? Ethan answered softly. Now we make them listen. They released the files through encrypted networks, sending copies to every major outlet and independent journalist. Within hours, the story spread. Whistleblower leaks expose global trafficking ring. Names of senators, corporate executives, and intelligence officers appeared across headlines. Protests erupted. Government agencies launched investigations. Whitmore vanished from public view. For a moment it seemed the darkness had cracked, but victories in the light cast long shadows. Late one evening, as Ethan stepped outside to breathe the cool air, he saw a reflection in the window. A flash of movement. He turned. The security system flickered and died. The house lights dimmed. He ran to the living room. Amara's notebook lay open on the floor. On the first page, someone had drawn a small black triangle, and beneath it, the words, "Clean the mistake." Ethan's stomach turned cold. He shouted her name. No answer. Reed staggered from the hall, gun raised. They're inside. Shots shattered the glass. Ethan dove for cover, dragging Lena behind the counter. Smoke filled the room. A figure moved through it, silent, efficient. Not Whitmore. Someone new. The man's eyes gleamed under a hood. He fired once, hitting the lamp beside Ethan's head. Reed returned fire. The intruder fell, but another took his place. The fight was chaos. Then Ethan heard a scream. Upstairs. Amara. He sprinted up the stairs, kicking open the door to her room. The window was open, curtains whipping in the wind. No one there. Only the sound of tires screeching outside. He ran to the balcony in time to see a van disappearing into the night. He felt something crack inside him deeper than fear. Lena's voice came from behind him. They took her. Ethan whispered, "They'll regret it." Hours later, Reed sat bleeding on the couch, trying to patch his wound. Ethan stood in the kitchen, phone to his ear. Every contact he called hung up when they heard the name Whitmore. The world had seen the evidence, but the machine still moved in silence. He turned to Lena. "We get her back or we burn this country to the ground." Lena met his eyes. "Then we start with Whitmore." By dawn, they were gone, leaving behind a shattered house and the ghost of a girl who had become their compass. Somewhere beyond the city, Amara sat blindfolded in the back of a van, whispering to herself so she would not forget her name. The driver made a call. Package secured. The voice on the other end replied with calm satisfaction. "Good. Bring her to me. The light will fall soon." In the distance, the sun rose over Washington like a wound reopening. and Ethan Vale prepared for the war that would decide whether the truth would finally survive the dark. The storm reached the city before dawn. Rain hammered against the windows of the safe house as Ethan and Lena prepared for what was left of the fight. The television flickered with reports about the leaked files. Politicians denied everything. Whitmore's name was whispered but never spoken aloud on camera. Somewhere beyond the screen the man still pulled strings, and Amara was gone. Ethan watched the rain blur the skyline and felt the silence tighten around him. Reed sat on the couch pale from blood loss but refusing to rest. He cleaned his weapon with shaking hands. "They will move her fast," he said. "Once she disappears into Whitmore's system, no one ever comes back." Lena stood near the window, her face drawn and pale. "Then we do not wait." They left the city as the sun broke through the clouds. The car smelled of salt and gunpowder. Ethan drove without speaking, eyes locked on the road ahead. He could see Amara's face every time he blinked the way she had looked when she told him his wife was alive. Her courage had reignited his own. Now she was somewhere in the dark because of it. Reed traced the coordinates on his tablet. Satellite images show a complex 200 miles south. Old power plant converted to data storage. Heavy security. No insignia, but the trucks outside belong to Whitmore's network. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. Then that's where she is. The power plant stood on the edge of a marshland, surrounded by reeds that whispered in the wind. As night fell, fog rose from the water like smoke. Reed scouted ahead through the reeds while Ethan and Lena waited by the car. The air was heavy with the scent of rust and oil. From the distance came the low hum of generators. Reed returned after an hour. One main entrance, 2 watchtowers, motion sensors along the perimeter. Not impossible, just suicidal. Ethan checked his gun. Then it's perfect. Lena put a hand on his arm. "You do not have to do this alone." He met her eyes. "I lost you once. I am not losing her too." They moved at midnight. The fog covered their approach. Reed cut the fence and they slipped inside. The compound glowed under floodlights, empty of movement but alive with sound. Inside, the main building corridors stretched in every direction, cold and metallic. Lena led them using the blueprint she had memorized from stolen files. Each step echoed through the steel halls. The tension was electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. At the far end, behind a reinforced door, they found the holding cells. Ethan forced the lock. Inside, Amara sat on a cot, her face bruised but eyes bright. When she saw him, she smiled weakly. "I knew you would come." Ethan knelt beside her. "Always." Before they could leave, an alarm screamed through the facility. Red light bled across the walls. Reed cursed under his breath. Too soon. They ran. Guards poured into the corridor, their shouts drowned by the thunder of gunfire. Ethan shielded Amara while Lena dragged Reed toward the exit. The firefight raged through the hall, bullets sparking off steel. Ethan hit 2 of the guards and kept moving. They reached the control room and sealed the door. Lena scanned the consoles. "This is where he runs everything. Cameras, shipments, the money." She inserted a drive. "Give me 2 minutes." On the screens, Whitmore's face appeared. Calm, immaculate, almost amused. "Mr. Vale." "You have been busy." Ethan stared at the monitor. "You took everything from me. You built this from my money and her pain." Whitmore smiled. "You built it too. The world runs on the hunger you fed. You think burning it down will make you pure." Ethan raised his weapon. "Where is the rest of your network?" Whitmore leaned closer to the camera. "Everywhere and nowhere." Then the feed went black. Explosions shook the floor. Reed shouted, "We have to go now." They fled through the smoke-filled corridors as the building erupted around them. Fire chased them to the outer gate. The heat roared against their backs. Amara stumbled, but Ethan lifted her. They reached the fence as a final blast tore through the power plant, throwing them to the ground. The shockwave rolled across the marsh and died. Silence followed, heavy and unreal. Reed coughed, pulling himself upright. That should keep him busy. Ethan looked back at the flames. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt something close to peace. But it did not last. Within hours, news feeds lit up again. Anonymous footage of the explosion. Speculation of terrorism. A new message appeared online, posted from an unknown source. A simple black triangle pulsing on the screen, and beneath it the words, "The fire cleans nothing." Whitmore was still alive. They hid for days, moving between safe houses. Amara, healed, slowly haunted by nightmares she refused to describe. Ethan and Lena watched the coverage as the government scrambled to contain the scandal. Some officials resigned, others vanished. Protests grew in every major city. But in the shadows, Whitmore's followers continued to operate. One night, Amara woke screaming. I saw him. He was standing in the fire. Ethan held her until she stopped shaking. The next morning, she asked for a camera. "I want to tell them what I saw." The video went online that afternoon. Amara sat in a plain room speaking directly to the lens. Her voice trembled, but her eyes never looked away. "They took me because I was small and alone. They thought no one would listen. But I saw everything. The numbers, the faces, the ships. And I am not invisible anymore." The clip spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, millions had watched. Hashtags filled the feeds. At "I can see you." At "Justice for the lost." The movement ignited. Crowds filled the streets, holding candles and signs bearing her words. "Silence is a luxury we can't afford." Weeks passed. The hearings began in Washington. Ethan and Lena sat behind Amara as she testified before the committee. Her voice carried through the vast chamber, calm and steady. She spoke of the night she met Lena, of the van, of the faces she would never forget. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. When it was over, the room rose in applause. Outside, thousands waited, chanting her name. Amara stepped into the light of the cameras and smiled for the first time without fear. Later that night, they returned to the estate on the cliffs. The house had been rebuilt, quieter now, stripped of its cold perfection. Amara stood on the balcony looking out at the sea. It was calm again, silver under the moon. Ethan joined her hands in his pockets. "You changed everything," he said. She shook her head. "We did." He nodded. "Maybe. But you reminded me what it means to fight for someone." She looked up at him. "What happens now?" He hesitated. We start again, build something honest, help others speak. She smiled. Then maybe it was worth it. Inside, Lena arranged flowers on the dining table, the same kind she used to bring from the market. She caught Ethan's gaze and smiled softly. The distance between them had become a memory instead of a wound. They ate dinner together, simple food, shared laughter. For a moment, the world outside seemed far away. But peace is never the end of a story. Days later, Ethan received a package with no return address. Inside was a phone and a single note. The light burns brightest before it dies. The screen lit up with a video feed. Whitmore alive, his face scarred but his eyes cold and clear. You took my network veil. You think you ended it. But ideas are harder to kill than men. You turned the world against me, and for that I will turn it against you. The feed cut off. Ethan stared at the blank screen, feeling the old darkness stir. Lena entered the room. What is it? He showed her the note. Her expression hardened. Then we stay ready. The following morning, Amara left for New York to join a youth summit on human rights. Reporters met her at the station. She waved shyly, but her eyes were focused. Ethan and Lena watched from the platform as the train pulled away. In the reflection of the glass, Ethan saw the faint outline of a triangle scratched into the metal of the carriage. He did not tell Lena. Some ghosts had to wait their turn. That night, he walked alone along the cliffs. The wind carried the smell of the ocean and the memory of all that had been lost. He thought of the girl who had changed everything simply by speaking, of the woman who had fought her way back from darkness, of the man he had been before all this began. The sky cleared and stars broke through the clouds. He whispered into the night, "Thank you." From somewhere far away, the echo of a child's laughter drifted on the wind. Months later, a new foundation opened its doors in Washington, the Veil Initiative. Its mission was simple: to protect those who could not protect themselves. Amara stood on stage at the opening ceremony, now taller, more confident. Ethan and Lena sat in the front row. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of everything they had survived. We are not defined by what they did to us. We are defined by what we choose to do now. The crowd rose in applause. Cameras flashed. The story had come full circle. As the lights dimmed that evening, Ethan returned home and found a small envelope on his desk. Inside was a photograph. Amara on stage smiling. And beneath it, written in ink, 3 words that chilled him, even as they made him smile. Let the light burn. He turned the photo over and saw the faint imprint of a triangle drawn in the corner. He looked out at the ocean, its surface calm and endless. Somewhere in that stillness, the war between light and shadow continued. But for now, the house was quiet. He closed his eyes and breathed. The world outside was far from healed, but it had begun to remember. Across cities and screens, people whispered her name. The girl who saw the dead woman breathe. The girl who spoke truth to silence. Her story had become a spark passed from hand to hand. And somewhere in the distance, the echo of that spark waited to rise again, patient and unstoppable, as the tide pulled the light back toward the horizon.